contact the caregiver, we're going to let them know why we're calling. We're going to let them know who we are, what we're about, who referred them, and what services we're going to provide, and answer any questions that they have about that. Sometimes caregivers will need more information. Sometimes caregivers will just want to schedule. So we want to make sure that we meet them where they are in that phone conversation. A lot of times intake will capture additional intake information from a caregiver that might not have been provided by a partner, might not have been known. So we do lean on the caregivers to give us a little bit more information. Sometimes during a phone call with a caregiver, we'll realize that the caregiver may need some support if they're struggling or they're anxious about agency involvement. We try to offer them support on the spot, and also we can schedule them a supportive call with one of our therapists to follow up with them so that they can better understand the process and how they can be a better support for their child during this situation if they're feeling stress or anxiety. Provide any additional supportive services for that family, whether it be interpretation through another language or additional support if a child has special needs. If a child's already engaged in therapy, we like to make sure we talk to the therapist before scheduling services. So we really want to make sure that we know where the child and the family is coming from. And by the time they walk in the door, we want to be able to accommodate them and provide the best service that we can for them. So when partners refer a family to us, it's very important that they provide intake with as much information as they can so that we're able to schedule more efficiently or provide the service that's being requested more efficiently. So from partners like DSS or law enforcement, we want them to go to intake to give them all the information to help them coordinate cases, make sure mandated reports are made, and we really expect them to lean on us to assist them in scheduling these services for families. We like our partners to know that sometimes they don't have all the answers or they don't know what they're calling to schedule, but we could definitely use our team to help them figure that out, and we could work as a team to determine what necessary steps are next.
CAFTA is actually what we call the service that provides not only our forensic interview, but also our forensic medical exams, our multidisciplinary team coordination at the time of the interview, as well as caregiver and family support from our advocacy team. CAFTA stands for the Child and Adolescent Forensic Trauma Assessment, and it includes all of those components, or could include just a couple of them, depending on what is needed for that specific case and family.
A forensic interview is a recorded interview of a child that screens for multiple typologies of abuse or neglect. It's developmentally sensitive and legally sound, and is utilized to obtain factual information from the child that can aid in an investigation. At Dee Norton, we screen for all typologies of abuse or neglect. So this includes physical or sexual abuse, neglect, exposure to substance abuse, or exposure to domestic violence. A forensic interview is not therapy, so while many of our forensic interviewers are licensed clinicians, this is a different service as it's forensic in nature. It's also not utilized to catch a child in a lie or to obtain evidence against that child.
At Dee Norton, there are 3 different tiers of recorded child interviews. So the forensic interview, which is what we think of for a criminal investigation, is actually a piece and component of their evidence for that investigation. So that is a forensic interview that's utilized only when there's allegations of child sexual abuse or severe child physical abuse. For those interviews, our investigators are able to attend, and only law enforcement or DSS investigators are really live observing them as they're happening. However, we do have 2 other tiers of forensic interviews or child recorded interviews. And so for those interviews, those are more of like our rule outs, or when there's not a direct allegation against a child, those interviews are utilized in the same format where the trained interviewer will use their protocol to interview the child in a neutral, non-biased, objective way, but it's not necessarily evidentiary because there's not as much of a criminal investigation. So for our cases where there's like exposure to substance abuse allegations, domestic violence that the child may have witnessed, that the interview is not being utilized for a forensic court reason, that would be more of our tier 2 interviews. And so our same DSS and law enforcement investigators are requested to be on site. And sometimes we also make accommodations to allow for foster care workers or other MDT partners to be able to observe those. Our tier 3 interviews are kind of our lowest level, and in that case, they're the most open for our MDT partners to observe. Those are utilized when it's a rule-out interview, just screening for all different kinds of safety concerns, or if there's a concern for like youth-initiated problematic sexual behavior or a child-on-child act. So for those tier 2 and tier 3 interviews, which we just call recorded child interviews, a law enforcement or DSS investigator is not required to be on site, but at Dee Norton, for our tier 1 forensic interviews, we do actually require our investigators to be there to help support and guide the forensic interview. So that's why we really need you all to attend.
To become a forensic interviewer, someone has to go through a minimum of 35-hour forensic interview training with one of the nationally recognized protocols. At Dee Norton, forensic interviewers are all trained in Child First South Carolina Forensic Interviewing of Children protocol, and many of our interviewers also have training in other protocols such as NCAC, NICHD, and RADAR. With the Child First protocol, there are 4 main components: the rapport building phase, the transition to a substantive topic phase, then the exploration of the referral concern and other screening for abuse or neglect, followed by a closure period. At Dee Norton, our forensic interviewers can conduct 4 different types of forensic interviews. They include traditional 1-session forensic interviews. We can also conduct expanded or multi-session interviews that occur over the course of 1 day or multiple days, but are still part of the same single forensic interview. We can also conduct targeted forensic interviews around a certain topic where we don't screen for all other typologies of abuse and neglect. And we can also do recantation interviews. We have a Spanish-speaking forensic interviewer here at Dee Norton, so we can conduct bilingual forensic interviews. We also have access to an interpretation system, so we can access any language as needed for a forensic interview. We can also conduct forensic interviews off-site at different locations in the region.
Comprehensive mental health services. So that would include things like mental health assessments, clinical treatment and therapy services, as well as case management and participation on the MDT staffings to provide a clinical perspective. So MDT will oftentimes recommend a mental health assessment if we know at the time of an appointment with a kiddo in a family, if kid's struggling, if the family, if the caregiver is struggling, if the family as a whole is struggling, we can recommend mental health services to occur here at Dee Norton, or we can also make outside referrals for if caregivers are wanting their own individual therapy, if they're wanting their own support services, we can refer for maybe that they get established with a school psychologist and maybe do a school psychologist evaluation, or maybe the MDT is going to recommend a referral to developmental peds if there's concerns around any kind of developmental delay. We can make recommendations for kids to follow up with school guidance counselors if there's concern for the child struggling at school. So in addition to mental health services that we can provide here and assessments that we can do here to really assess for the impact of trauma, the MDT coming together, all different disciplines, is able to make recommendations for supportive services that would best fit the needs of whatever the kid and family presents with. takes a look at the emotional experience, any behavioral symptoms, and kind of any impact or impairment to life and functioning for the child and for the family. So we ask lots of questions about how kids and families are doing, how they're coping, and what challenges they're experiencing. And after gathering all that information, we're able to make recommendations for services that we think might be helpful, whether that's therapy, whether it's continued or additional evaluation, or support services that we know of out in the community. So that's really the goal of the assessment, is to generate those recommendations. Being able to share information from mental health assessments and staffings is incredibly helpful, particularly when we're working with our DSS partners and they have treatment plans that they are prescribing for families. We're able to speak about the emotional needs of the child, but also the family as a whole, and be able to inform, based on our assessment here, this is what we think might be needed for them. How can we coordinate it with additional treatment plans that are already in place for the family, so that we're not duplicating services and so we're not overburdening families and they're still getting the help that they need.
The role of a family advocate here at Dee Norton is to serve as the central point of support for a caregiver and the family throughout the life of a case. So we are the liaison between the MDT, the clinical services, and we're their shoulder to lean on. We're the person that they can come to from the time that they call us to the very end of the case. The beauty of the advocacy team here is that we have advocates that cover essentially every area. So I'm with the PSB team, which is problematic sexual behavior. And we also have a bilingual advocate to serve our Spanish-speaking communities. We have an impact advocate for teens that are at risk or need services in a different capacity. We have clinical advocates. So it really touches all the bases for all the families that we see. The family advocates, in short, we do everything. We do everything in-house and also outside of this building. So we can do everything from tell you where to park your car to arrange clinical services at the end. So a family comes to us and we help to coordinate scheduling. What time can a family come in for the appointment? How are we going to get there? Let's talk through that. Once they get here, what services do you need? Do you need help with transportation? Do you need help with clothing? Are there any daily functioning needs that you have that we can help you with? And then on top of that, what clinical needs does your child have? Do you have as a caregiver? How can we support that? How can we hear you? How can we get you engaged in services that you might need or that your child might need?
It is crucial that all of these different agencies come to the table with their own information about interactions with the family and the needs of the family so that we can all be on one accord. It is really about giving them that mental capacity to take forward, because we are only there for a period of time, which might be short or might be for the long haul, but they have to have those tools in their toolbox that will take them further than we can take them.